Namaste everyone. Welcome to Damru Studio and to today's session of our annual yoga festival Bilwa 2021. Every year Damru celebrates Bilwa annual festival. It's our yoga festival and we choose a specific theme, either mainly around the Indian tradition and its knowledge systems. Last year, Bilwa's theme was Bharatiya Parampara, rebuilding modern India on the strong foundations of Sanatan Dharma. This year, we have chosen the topic Cultural Appropriation of Yoga, the necessity to embrace the inherent Indianness of the yogic culture. It's a beautiful subject, and we invite speakers and scholars from across the globe to give talks or workshops on these subject or these theme this year. So before I kind of go ahead about the talk for today, I would like to share that Bilwa is implemented or conducted under the wing of Damru Foundation. Damru Foundation is a trust, it's a public trust of Damru Yoga and Sound Therapy Studio with the main aim of implementing and promoting the traditional yogic studies and to spread the awareness about wellness and harmony in the society. Our primary focus, however, stays with that section of the society who are in dire need of wellness, holistic wellness, but they can't afford it. So if you wish to contribute and support our efforts, please find the payment link in the section, the description section of this YouTube video. And you can make payments in a single part or multiple parts. And your contributions will definitely help us in spreading more awareness, in inviting more speakers and bringing such knowledge platforms for everyone and supporting that section that we want to. So we can do that together and we really appreciate your contributions. Coming to today's talk now, it is someone who is very, very special. It's a special one for Damru family especially. It's Mauli Baviskar, who will be talking today. She is a dear one to many of us who are either part of the Damru family or if you've known her outside in the professional circles and of course family and friends. She's extremely dear and she will be talking to us today on the subject of Shraddha and Ishvara Pranidhana, unlocking the flow state. I will introduce a little about her, but before that, I think I like to invite her and bring her onto the session. Hi, Molly. Namaste. Welcome to today's session.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for taking time and being part of Bilwa this year. Let me give a quick introduction about you before we hand over the session to you. So, for the ones who don't know much about her, Molly has or is a practicing yoga therapist and a sound therapist. She is the founder and executive director of Damru Yoga and Sound Therapy Studio and the brainchild of Bilwa Annual Yoga Festival. Molly has had her own journey crafted since she was a little child. Her mother introduced her to Hindustani classical music at a tender age of 4 years when her hands were so little that her Sangeet teacher used to hold her tiny hands as he would help her move across the harmonium. And as I know, he used to even press her hands after the session. Well, ever since, she has been a sadhaka of Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet, which is an integral part of her identity today. As a designer, she is a designer by education and a vocalist at heart. Molly has 3 master's degrees in interwoven areas such as music. With the history that I told you, it's natural and it's great that she's had a master's degrees in music, in yoga therapy, and one more in relation to art, design, and humanities. Molly founded Damru with a vision to preserve, protect, and propagate the authentic traditional practices of yoga and Indian culture. She is the only person in the state of Gujarat to be recognized as an IAYT certified yoga therapist by International Association of Yoga Therapists, USA, one of the only 24 other members across the whole of India as of today. While she spends most of her time dealing with the therapy care seekers, she loves to work with pregnant women as she firmly believes that if we sow healthy seeds, when they sprout, they will create a beautiful society. She is the first woman in this relation in the state of Gujarat to be an internationally certified prenatal yoga teacher, RPYT, by Yoga Alliance USA. Again, one of the only 38 other RPYTs across the whole of India as of today. In addition to her master's degree in music, Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet, she has an in-depth training in Vedic mantras in Krishna Yajurveda tradition that she incorporates in her teaching. She currently holds a position of Joint Secretary in Indian Yoga Association Gujarat chapter and also runs a non-profit public trust, Damru Foundation, under which we run Bilwa. Molly, we are delighted to have you with us today, and thank you again. I will hand over the session to you. It'll be great if you can talk a little about the subject and take the session from here on.
Thank you. That was a sweet introduction. Thank you so much. Yes, so Prayal being an integral part of Damru, I am so glad today that I am sharing screen with her, and it's something very close to my heart. So thank you for volunteering for this part, for hosting this talk. So thank you, Prayal.
Thank you.
Now, as I move on to the topic for today, I think just a few days back on the Facebook, there was this post by somebody on the same topic, so cultural misappropriation of yoga that is happening. And it was being discussed, and somebody was commenting that instead of ranting about it, instead of complaining about it, why don't you provide solutions? So, if that person is watching today, this topic that I have chosen is precisely an attempt on those lines. Let's move into our topic. Khalil Gibran, I'm going to quote him. He says that faith is an oasis in the heart which will never be reached in the caravan of thinking. Okay. So I feel faith. So for now, temporarily, till we understand in detail what Shraddha implies, what it means, we are more or less translating it as faith. Okay? So I feel faith is a compassionate way of bringing in cultural appropriation rather than refuting or pulling down someone or standing up against something. I think if we could show the path, if we could show what the solution is, that would be much more helpful. So what is the path? What is the way? The path of Kriya Yoga as offered in the Yoga Sutras of Rishi Patanjali, I feel, is the best way. So we are not going to go into the Ashta Angas of that have been proposed by Patanjali, but the three pillars of Kriya Yoga or the practices are tapas, swadhyaya, and Ishvara pranidhana. So you can refer to the earlier talks that have been happened in Bilwa, and this year only, Miss Shobana, she has talked about Swadhyaya, and in her talk, she's talked about all these yamas and niyamas that we'll be getting into. But I'm not going to go into the detail. If you want to know about them, go to Shobana Ma'am's talk. And I think about tapas, there was the first talk by Miss Charvi. She talked about the Panchamahayagyas. So you can refer to the earlier talks. We will directly dive into Ishvara Pranidhana. So if Ishvara Pranidhana, so again, till we go into the concept of Ishvara Pranidhana, consider the translation as surrender. Okay, so till then. If Ishvara Pranidhana happens, then I feel there is no place or even requirement for cultural misappropriation of the yogic practices. The root cause I feel for these misappropriations is because we approach the practice with ego consciousness. That's where there is a need. When you're operating from the ego consciousness, you feel a need to change something, to edit or to delete something. But if there is complete surrender, if there is total acceptance, then there is no need for any change, right? And for Ishvara Pranidhana to happen, Shraddha is the prerequisite. Okay, so let's go step by step. Understand these terms broadly, the ego consciousness, and then moving into the concept of Shraddha. But before that, generally whenever you have a talk and a speaker is doing a presentation, towards the end they give the list of references that they had referred. So, but let me share these sources of my inspirations and guides for this talk right at the start and pay my obeisance to them. Mainly, I'll be taking inspirations from Swami Vivekananda and the Ramakrishna Mission publication, Vedanta Kesari. Then Swami Niranjananandji from Bihar School of Yoga. Pandit Rajamani Tigunath from the Himalayan tradition. Of course, Miss Nritya Jagannathan, from whom I study Yoga Sutras. Some quotes from Sri Desikachar sir. And the scriptures that I referred are mainly the Yoga Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, and a brief reference from Adi Shankaracharya's Vivek Chudamani, which offers a wonderful definition to Shraddha. Okay, so that were my references. And secondly, while I take these big names, I do not intend to make this session very technical or very philosophical. Minimal that is needed, we will go into, but more or less I'll stay into or try to make it as simple as possible. So we're not here to discuss the Yoga Sutras, that's a different space and amount of time that is needed, that's a different session altogether. But so I'm quoting them or I'm picking references from them in context to the given theme that we're considering today of the cultural misappropriations that are happening these days and how do we bring about a cultural appropriation. While I make it as simple as possible, the intention is to make it accessible to one and all, especially to those who indulge in such misappropriations, maybe knowingly, maybe unknowingly, so that they can understand what they are missing out on in this vast practice of what they call yoga. So now let's get into it. You all must have heard this very common phrase, the neurons that fire together, wire together. So the brain cells, the neurons, the more our brain does a certain task, the stronger that neural network or the pattern or the pathway becomes, making the process more efficient each successive time. So coming to the yamas and niyamas, the five yamas are ahimsa, satya, asteya, aparigraha and brahmacharya. While the five niyamas are shaucha, santosha, swadhyaya, tapas and ishwar pranidhana. Okay, so coming to the yamas and niyamas, which are like the base, the start point at the practice of yoga, every time you behave in a certain way, remember your brain is creating a feedback loop. It is learning constantly. So if you are putting self-sabotaging or conflicting or negative behavioral patterns, if you are adhering to asatya, hinsa, or steya, or things like that, not in line with the yamas, remember your brain is getting better at it each time. Yamas and niyamas, what are they? They're like positive conditioning, and the more you repeat them, the better and better you get at that. Your brain gets better at it. These, the yamas and the niyamas, they are the mahavratams that guide you towards an efficient and enriched way of living. It's for you more than anybody else. So it's not right to say that yamas and niyamas are the ethical or moral ways of conduct. In fact, they are the expression, the behaviors, and the conditioning of your mind. See, when you get stressed, what do? We search for peace. When you are challenged in difficult times or life situations, we seek happiness, we seek joy, success, etc. So then what stops us from experiencing that which we are seeking for? See, negativity is easy. A small thing happens and you want to shout and cry and complain and hurt others. Why? So there's this beautiful quote by Nelson Mandela, and I quote, if anything there is that people are afraid of, it is their own luminosity. Yes, surprising as it sounds, but we are afraid of our own light. You innately want to do good. You yourself stand in your own way because of your own fears, because of your own defenses and beliefs, the limiting beliefs, the egocentric beliefs. Stop doing that. When you choose to stop, that is the beginning of yamas and niyamas. So start observing yamas and niyamas little by little, baby steps. So say 2 hours a day, 12 hours, 24 hours. And when you start seeing or observing these yamas and niyamas, you will see a completely different self than what you think you are. You might have an idea that, oh, I am a very caring person, a very humble and a gentle and a helping kind of a person. I don't hurt others. I don't mean bad for others. All this image that you have, just look at yourself through the lens of yamas and niyamas and you'll see yourself as you are. So sometimes this self-check is very important. What happens is people come to me often saying that I've been practicing Anuloma Viloma for 10 years, but nothing is happening. It doesn't seem to work on me. And when I ask why did they think like that, they say maybe the teacher was not right, maybe the place was not right, maybe the training curriculum was not right, or maybe yoga doesn't work for me. Yes, they doubt the whole practice of yoga, but never their own selves. Not wanting to look into their own limitations, analyzing their own behaviors, inputs, efforts, and in proportion to that, the progress or the reverse that is happening. If they observe, they will have their own answers. So, see, if you cannot change the mental conditioning, then maybe you can say that I am practicing body work, breath work, movement. But the moment you say you're practicing yoga, then the whole premise of yoga has to be understood, accepted, and practiced with sincerity, with a sense of commitment. So, where do you start? I would say start with Shraddha and not Samshaya. When we start on a new thing, we want to start on a positive note, right? So start with faith and not doubt in your mind. Have a purpose. And let's understand now this word Shraddha and its implications. So as we started off, Shraddha could be roughly translated as faith or deep conviction. Shraddha meaning truthfulness or faithfulness, and Dha meaning to direct one's mind towards. So we are directing our mind towards a higher truth. So according to Swami Vivekananda, the most vital and essential quality needed to succeed in life is Shraddha. Shraddha is a mental attitude, and if we dissect this concept, it's primarily constituted of 4 aspects: sincerity and purpose, humility, reverence, and faith. So when I say purpose, purpose means the force or the power of motivation with which one does something. The motive with which we seek, with faith and not doubt and suspicion. While I talk about these concepts, keep connecting it with your yoga practice as we talk along. all of this that I am going to talk constantly connected with your own sadhana, your own practice. So purpose, then humility. Humility is a quality of receptivity and willingness to learn and undergo all that is involved in learning. When we say humility, it does not mean an attitude of servility. It is the ability to let go of one's own ego and bend oneself to receive something, to receive the knowledge. Then comes reverence. Reverence and Shraddha always go together. One should have a sense of respect and adoration as opposed to carelessness or casualness. So, the source from which we're getting the knowledge, whether it is a guru, whether it is scripture, or whatever it is, this sense of respect and adoration is so important. I think it is respect for something that endows one with continuity and stability. Respect is also an attitude of non-exploitation. One is honest and devoted and does not behave with calculations. So faith means being firmly rooted in the presence of something. Okay? So these four, purpose, humility, reverence, and faith, together is what we call Shraddha. And I will quote Swami Vivekananda here. He says, to preach the doctrine of Shraddha is the mission of my life. Let me repeat to you that this faith is one of the potent factors of humanity and all religions. First, have faith in yourself. Know that though one may be a little bubble and another may be a mountain high wave, yet behind both the bubble and the wave, there is the infinite ocean. They are backed by the same principle. What makes the difference between man and man is the difference in Shraddha and nothing else. What makes one man great and another weak and low is the Shraddha. This Shraddha is what I want, which what all of us want, this faith in ourselves. To get that faith is a great task before you. Give up all the awful disease that is creeping in our national blood. That idea of ridiculing everything, that loss of seriousness, give that up. Be strong and have the Shraddha, and everything else is bound to follow. Imagine, he was saying the same things that we really need to understand even today. If you see all these pseudo intellectuals, or I don't even want to name the categories, but we see this very often, ridiculing our own culture, our own values, and they think it's a cool thing to do that. Give up that idea. It's an awful disease, like Swami Vivekananda says. We have to be strong and have Shraddha, and everything will follow, definitely follow. So this word, Shraddha, Dharane, so inherent capacity, Dharan is to hold, inherent capacity to hold the truth. That holdingness is Shraddha. There's this beautiful definition of Shraddha. So we're going to the proper definition of Shraddha, okay? That's given by Adi Shankaracharya in the text Viveka Chudavani. So I pull out this one shloka from there. Shastrasya Guru Vakyasya Satya Buddhi Avadharanam Sa Shraddha Kathita Satvihi Yaya Vastu Upalabhyate. Acceptance of what the scriptures and our gurus instruct us, with the firm judgment of that being true, is by the sages it is called Shraddha, and by the means of which the reality is perceived. So if we go deeper into this concept, this is further explained by Swami Ranganathan of Ramakrishna Math, that understanding the true word of your guru, your teacher, or the scriptures is Shraddha. Shastrasya Guru Vakyasya Satya Buddhi Avadharanam. Shraddha is not Vishwas, it's not belief, okay? Such a static believer simply swallows what others say without testing it or getting evidences for one's own self. But Shraddha here is faith with with a view to investigate the truth of what is being told. A deep, rational thinking forms the basis of such a strong faith. Satya Buddhi Avadharanam means ascertaining through reason. Okay, remember this. We are not just believing on the face value. We are ascertaining through reason the truth of what is said, and this is what makes us go ahead from the level of mere faith to the level of truth. Shraddha is that by which the truth is realized. Sa Shraddha Kathita Sadvihi Yaya Vastu Upalabhyate. So it is not enough to say, okay, I believe. Any fool can say that. But a man who says, I believe such and such to be true, carries his life to the level of that truth where he transforms his own belief into Shraddha. So I think I should share some of my experiences to make this concept a little easier to understand. So when we talked about the definition of Shraddha, we talked about Shraddha in the scriptures, Shraddha in the Guru, and Shraddha in general. So these three instances. So Shraddha in the scriptures. Okay. So some of you might know that I have learned the Vedic chants from the Krishnamacharya tradition. And before I could go to the Mandiram to learn this from some of the best teachers, I already knew a lot about music, and in theory, I had read a lot about the effect of sound, how profoundly it can affect us, especially when we talk about the Vedic mantras, what they are, what in theory. This was the study that I was doing by myself, but there was no experience of it. I was just studying it. But when I got the chance and the opportunity presented, and I was at the Mandiram, it was like so basically we would be there at the Mandiram for say around 8 hours doing this chants. And luckily I had a roommate, she was also a musician and a yoga teacher. So even while we were cooking, or while we would get up in the morning for our practices, and even in the evening, late nights, we just used to chant and chant and chant. And there was this intense practice that was happening. And that brought about a life transforming kind of a shift that I would experience. And I would say that is when, so I had this Shraddha in the scriptures or in my research or whatever I had done. But when it came into my own experience, now when somebody asks me that, okay, what does chanting do? The way I would now respond is very different than way I would have responded earlier. Okay, so okay, respect and belief for the scriptures, studying them, pursuing them, and then bringing it into a practice, make it our own truth. And when that happens, Shraddha manifests. Okay, so like Vyasa Muni says, Shraddha gave me that energy, courage, and strength. Another experience now I'm going to share with you in regards to Shraddha in my Guru. So I have been a student of Hindustani classical music, and I think this was quite some years back. But when I had finished my graduation, my Visharad, Sangeet Visharad, and while I would present myself as a very humble kind of a person, there was this small ego behind where I thought, okay, I am a Sangeet Visharad, I know so much. I went to Mumbai to my Guruji, and it was a Guru Shishya Parampara there. And every morning we used to just reach there, and till night we would just practice music, Sangeet Sadhana. And I thought, because I know so much, he will teach me this, and all those ideas in my mind. There was a small room. It was Mumbai. The apartment was small, and Guruji would teach other students. He would make me sit in a corner and just tell me to sing or practice. Sa, Shadaj. So I was kind of okay with that for some hours, one day, 1 week. And I started getting uncomfortable because the small kids would come and he would teach them different ragas. And I was there sitting right in the corner, just doing my sa morning to evening, morning to night, every single day. And it kind of got frustrating. And there were doubts. And there was this urge to run away and come back. And I was not even aware of these concepts back then, but something within me stopped me. And Shraddha is reverence more than anything else. And knowing that though we are unable to see right now, there is surely much more to what is seen. As Rabindranath Tagore says, that faith is a bird which feels light when the dawn is still dark. A similar kind of feeling was there in me that, okay, maybe something is coming, or okay, let me just persist. And with that, I think it was some months. And and every evening he would call me, and then he would say that now sing Sa Bhariye. And I was be like, okay, I am sitting like 8 feet away from him. He's been listening to me the whole day, and now he's calling me right in front and then telling, sing this again. Then he would listen, and then he would be like, not good enough, not good enough. It was very frustrating, believe me. One day that breakthrough happened when I was sitting there, and suddenly I could see this huge canvas of Sa, where I could see this Swara expanding or contracting, or the whole shade, the whole canvas. It was huge and it was appalling. We just think it is Saregama Padani, but it's not that. One Swara had a whole vast canvas, and I was just taken aback by that feeling. And that day, Guruji called me, and I think that is after which he just opened all his treasures. He taught me so much. But till then, he was waiting or maybe testing me, I don't know. But maybe some innate Shraddha just made me hang there through. Shraddha pulled that virya or energy within me. So whenever I would feel exhausted or want to give up, I think my faith was strong and I tried harder and I could manage. So where do you think I mean, now that I'm talking about it, back then I didn't know this, but now when I see it in retrospect, I feel where did I get that energy from? Maybe it was possible just because of the Shraddha. Okay, so that was Shraddha and the Guru. Even when you don't see anything coming up for long time, you just persevere knowing that having that Shraddha deep within, that something is to come. But talking of Shraddha in general, so say suppose I'm having a bad headache today. I have my family doctor with whom I love that doctor and I fully believe in him. The doctor today gives me just a sugar pill. I take that and I'm cured of my headache. How do you think that happens? Science explains it as the placebo effect. But if you observe, when the neurochemistry supports us, when does the neurochemistry support us? When the system, our own system, releases conflict and turns into the harmony with a larger force. So when I took that sugar pill, the doctor did nothing to cure me. So what worked? My Shraddha in the doctor, which means Shraddha is not dependency on an external source, but it is harnessing our own inner power. Now see this concept in regards to your own personal yoga practice. Is it happening? When you have Shraddha, there is this profound tranquility or a pleasant mindedness that comes in. And when this is the state of mind, naturally the desire to learn more about this truth inspires us. So it's a cycle. The more you see the validity of yoga, the more the faith in practice, the more the faith happens, the more you want to go deeper into the practice. So Vyasamuni says, Faith sustains us like a loving mother, and we are calmed by its presence. We rest and grow in it, and it nurtures us. To illustrate this, faith is, in our Indian Maya, it is frequently personified as a feminine image of a loving, protective force that nurtures us like a mother or a goddess. So if Shraddha is so powerful, why is misappropriation of yoga happening? You would not do it if you understand this concept, right? So let us understand that why this is happening. And so I'm taking inspiration from Desikachar sir, from something he had written, and I think that really clicked with me. So he says that the Westerners have disconnected from their roots, and today actually not just Westerners, the modern Indian urban population, if you see, is the same thing happening. And now when in need of support, they don't know where to turn. So therefore they are now turning to the Eastern traditions. But understand that this has not happened because of their Shraddha or reverence, but it has happened because of their raga or the attachment. They did practices, they did reap some benefits out of it, but the moment they found something else, the mind gets distracted. They get attracted to something else, and then something else, and something else. So when they come to learn yoga and they learn their idea of yoga is preliminarily doing asanas, and it's ego boosting when you can do some advanced asanas. This concept of advanced asana is a very funny concept to me. They think that if they can turn in this Vrishchikasana, scorpion pose, then it is an advanced yoga. Anyways, we'll not get into that whole topic. But so suppose they're doing this pose and now they're hurting or injuring their spine. Now, oh, yoga created injury, it doesn't work for me. So they go to, say, Pilates. They work there for some time, then they get bored, and then they want to go to Zumba because it is entertaining. But then something happens with their knee joint, and then again they want to come back to yoga. Now they come to me for therapy. So this is not a stable state of mind. It is without Shraddha, and without Shraddha, it cannot be achieved. Not just yoga, nothing can be achieved. And then what happens? So sometimes some of these people, they revert to shortcuts. Maybe a few difficult asana names they learn in this 10 days or 1 month teacher training course they do. And now they call themselves yogacharyas. What? See, this is the cycle of ignorance that perpetuates. And now they will be teaching other students. Now imagine what is the understanding of yoga for their students. So we need to change the way yoga is taught. And I feel unless Shraddha is instilled, they will not aspire to know the higher truth. Shraddha can be cultivated through the knowledge of Swadharma at the first level. And adherence to Swadharma itself will give rise to that strength and innate Shraddha, which will then take them further. Even Bhagavad Gita, the most revered text, this whole chapter, the 17th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it is called Shraddhatraya Vibhagaha Yoga. This whole chapter is dedicated to this concept of Shraddha. So when Arjuna is in doubt, Krishna explains him this whole concept of faith in deep detail. So we're not going to the detail of 17th chapter, that you can refer by yourself, but Krishna explains this faith of being of three types depending on the nature of gunas, the sattva, rajas, and the tamas, which an individual entertains within himself, governed by ahar, yagya, tapas, dana. So, briefly, just to summarize, if a man's innate tendencies are characterized by sattva, then his Shraddha will direct him to the pursuit of knowledge and happiness. If they're characterized by Rajas, then his faith will direct him to the pursuit of action and worldly pleasures ending in pain and suffering. And if his faith is characterized by tamas, then it will lead him to ignorance and delusion. So even within Shraddha, you have to be vigilant by which guna is propelling this force. Okay? So Shraddha is that powerful force from within, propelled by which all the faculties of a person act in their responsive field. It gives direction to a man's determination, endows him with a character. But this has to be shaped, and this can be done by the study of yamas and the niyamas that are explained in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Again, if you want to go through the overview of yamas and niyamas, please refer to Ms. Shobana Srinivasan's talk on Swadhyaya. I think it was on 3rd of July. It will be on our YouTube channel. So all the yamas and the 4 niyamas, the first 4 niyamas, when a person has done enough of contemplation and culturing of the self, Ishvara Pranidhana is the last niyama where the egocentric identification of the self is also demanded to be dissolved in the source. This is where the ultimate connection or yoga happens. The state of samadhi, the final goal of yoga, is impossible without Ishvara Pranidhana. So now let us come. We understood Shraddha in different ways. Now let us come to the concept of Ishvara Pranidhana. So the schematic practice of yoga consists of Kriya Yoga especially consists of 3 components: tapas, swadhyaya. Tapas is the austerities, swadhyaya is the self-study, and Ishvara Pranidhana. Broadly, we understand Ishvara Pranidhana as the unshakable faith in the guiding and protecting power of God. The second chapter of Yoga Sutras, it comes with this sutra, Tapaha Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani. So, Tapaha, Swadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana. So, that consists of this concept of Kriya Yoga, out of which we will see the word Ishvara Pranidhana. So, first let us break the word Ishvara and Pranidhana. So it's very important when we say surrender to God, and people say, okay, I don't believe in God, I don't believe, or what is Ishvara? Basically, you have to understand when you are here ready to surrender, who are you surrendering to, and what is this concept of Ishvara? Let's look at a quick definition of Ishvara that is given in the Yoga Sutras. So, क्लेश कर्म विपाका शैर परामृष्टः पुरुष विशेष ईश्वरः. So Ishvara is the one who is free of the klesha, the karma, and all the things. He is a Purusha Vishesha, and Ishvara being the principle that is all knowing. Tatra niratishayam sarvajna bijam. The one who is all knowing. And then the third one of the sutras says, Sapurvesham api guru kale nana vacchedat. Ishvara can also be understood as a timeless guru. So now if you see Ishvara, it comes as a guiding, a protecting force, the omniscient, all-present, primordial, eternal being, the teacher of all the previous teachers, and the soul free from the afflictions, the kleshas, the karmas, and the fruit of the karmas. Okay, so now that is the concept of Ishvara. Now coming to the word Pranidhana. So one understanding of Pranidhana is surrender that we saw. What it also means when we say surrender, what does it mean? It means that I am trying to align or harmonize with something else. What is that something else? The cosmic alignment, that out of which we are created. We're trying to align with that. And how do you do that? So Ishvara is also actually defined as Tasya Vachaka Pranavaha. he also, there's another way to align. Before we get into it, suppose you're into music and you know how you tune in your instruments. You tune in one string with the other string so that they both are in harmony. They create resonance. Similarly, if I have to be in resonance with a higher frequency, I need to tune in. How do you tune in? Through chanting Pranava, Omkara. So Ishvara is one of his names is also Pranava. And so how do you do that? Tad japaha tadartha bhavana. You do the japa. You repeat with bhavana, with surrender. And what is the outcome of this? So tataha pratyak chetana adhigamo api antaraya abhavascha. From that comes the real, from that as in from chanting Om comes the realization of the individual self, and the obstacles are removed. So see, to support this process, Patanjali also recommends meditation, in particular practice of japa, repetition of mantra. There is this deep science of sound. When you are into a particular pattern, what happens to your brain? But maybe we'll go into that later, maybe some other session. But when you're chanting, the doubt or the samshaya that happens in the mind is overcome by japa. Through this, our mind acquires an enduring trust in the presence of the infinite within us. Uh, so at Dambu, we also have been doing a Vedanta study class. So one of the students had asked me about the importance of mantra japa, or whether or not it is okay to do it or not do it. So see, mantra japa in itself is kind of a sacrifice, and it gains support from every branch of yoga practice, whether it is Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, Nada Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. Mantra jap is supported by every branch of yoga practice, and in this act of remembering and reciting this mantra, the mind's distractedness and doubts are sacrificed in the favor of a conscious return to your inner center. So by returning to that center every single day, your faith starts deepening. Okay. So now if we see the Ishvara and Pranidhana, the complete surrender, recognition, or in keeping at the center of the life, that's what Pranidhana means. So then together, Ishvara Pranidhana refers to having complete faith in the guiding and protecting power of the absolute reality. But sometimes what happens is when we translate Ishvara Pranidhana as simply as surrender, sometimes it gives the impression of giving up, or a sense of weakness or inaction or passivity. This kind of an understanding is very misguiding. The first, so see now, see how Ishvara Pranidhana works. The first step in practicing Ishvara Pranidhana, it requires making an effort to comprehend the true meaning of Ishvara, what we just had a look. You have to understand that what is it that you are surrendering to. So when you understand, then the faith starts becoming unshakable. And then once the faith becomes strong, it becomes guiding, and it becomes like a protective power. That is the essence of Ishvara Pranidhana. Infusing our, so now you understood what Ishvara is, okay? Now infusing our actions with this faith is the second step. And then, so first you understand what Ishvara is. Second, now all your actions are infused by this faith and understanding of this Ishvara. And the third step is surrendering the fruits of your action and not being affected by the results of our actions in the final step. This, I think we're going to come back in the form of a story later. Even Bhagavad Gita says this. But what does that actually imply? Does it mean that we do things and we don't even get something in return, or we don't. How is it that we do something and we don't expect things in return? Wait for a while. We'll come back to this in a while. Okay. So, in a nutshell, Swami Niranjananandji, he explains this concept of Ishvara Pranidhan very beautifully. Still, that question is there, so that ego consciousness is there. So let's understand. He says surrender means being a sailboat and not a motorboat. On a sailboat, you can only move as the wind moves, and you finally make it to the shore. A motorboat tries to go against the current, and it doesn't care about the direction of wind, but it wants to have a sense of independence and freedom. That's what we all also want, right? Surrender is actually the dependence on the wind. And as long as we have our own motorboat, we can never learn to surrender ourselves, because this engine will keep on going as long as the gasoline runs. And when there is no gas, the boat will drift into the sea and get lost. So surrendering or sailing is also a big skill. The sailors, it's a very skillful art. So surrender is also a skill as well as it is a sadhana. It's a state of mental awareness and going with in alignment with the larger force of wind in this example. So now if you feel that, oh God, I just stock up a lot of gasoline, a lot of types of gasoline, a lot of amount of gasoline, so that my motorboat will reach its destination without getting lost. If this is your idea, then my dear friend, you are deeply mistaken. Let's take the example of Draupadi when she was dragged into the Sabha by Dushasana. Do you remember who all was sitting there? All these biggies, all these different kinds and qualities of gasoline were right there. All the powerful people, right from Bhishma Pitamaha, Kripacharya, Dronacharya, and of course the 5 Pandavas. Yudhishthir, who represents Dharma itself. Bhima represents strength. Arjuna, who represents highest skill. And Yuti, represented by the twins, Nakula and Sahadeva. Now, with these, could any of these help her? Whatever was the situation, any situation can come even in our lives. So whatever was the situation, all of these powerful people, she herself was a powerful queen. What could she do? And believe me, partial surrender is never an option. Till Draupadi was still holding on to her sari, no help came. It's only when she fully surrendered, complete Sharanagati, is when Shri Krishna came in. Now this is a metaphor. You have to understand that it is a metaphor that when complete Sharanagati or full surrender, Ishvara Pranidhana happens, this is like a key into the, or an entry point into the higher realm. Remember, we started this talk with a quote of Khalil Gibran, that faith is like an oasis in the heart and it cannot be reached in the caravan of thinking. Now we have been step by step trying to analyze and understand this concept till now. We used logic, and when it comes to the cosmic consciousness, it goes beyond the realm of logic. And that is where we need preparation. Preparation of what? Of what we have not prepared till now. And what does that mean? Well, it just means that you need to have a pure feeling to become empty, to become egoless. You may be very well educated, or very rich, or very beautiful, or you may have many things. If you have a big ego, then you don't know the art of surrender. It is an art, believe me. Ego will prevent you from establishing that access to the higher knowledge. So then it is your responsibility to raise your frequency, to become empty and raise your frequency. And it is your need, remember, when you are surrendering, it is for your own upliftment, for own well-being, for your own enriching your own life, Because the universe does not need your surrender. Or if you have a guru, he or she doesn't need your surrender. It is you who need it, and you need to learn to therefore expand your boundaries. Like Swami Vivekananda said, Samashtihi Jivanam, Vyashtihi Nunam Mrityuhu. Expansion is life, contraction is death. So expand from that little bubble of ego consciousness in which you're trapped. So now to summarize and bring together all these concepts of Shraddha, Ishvara Pranidhana, here is it's like an anecdote. Let's see if you can relate to it. You have to be thinking and processing along with me. So now imagine I have a very expensive car, okay? And I am driving it on the National Highway number 8. But with this expensive car of mine and with this awesome, beautiful road in front of me, I am kind of scared to go at a speed of like 140, 160 kilometers per hour. Why? Maybe because I'm afraid. I don't know what goes into making of the car. I don't trust the company, maybe. So then, so then I first need to understand what this company does. How does it design, or what all precautions that they've taken. And maybe with that manual, I can trust them a little bit. I know that they've done their research. And yet, even after reading all the material that was given to me or listening, I was still afraid the first time I went fast. Okay? It is only later, after the second or the third time, that this fear was now converted into having fun. Because now I fully trust on my experience. I did my research, but then I made it my experience. Now the Shraddha has grown strong. Okay, so keep relating this story with this concepts that we've learned. Now I have this Shraddha, I have my experience. So of course, I can go really fast. Speed could be disastrous if I don't know the traffic rules and if I am not vigilant enough. So on this path of Shraddha also, the same thing applies. So the yamas and the other niyamas are extremely essential to prevent accidents that lead me to my grave, maybe. So what happened here? If you study this whole thing, I collaborated. Yeah, my knowledge was limited to say my profession and a little bit here and there, but I was unaware of what is the mechanics of a car or how it functions. So then, should I have restricted to just walking because I don't know how this works? No, I tried and tested. I trusted it. I made it my experience, but someone else's knowledge was my base guide. I chose to collaborate. And by collaborating, I enhanced the quality of my life. Okay. I also checked the car manual, how the emergency brakes work, and how the airbags function, so that in dire need, I know what to do. Okay, I did my study. Now, if I want to know about the technology of a BMW, would you think I would go and read the manual of Jaguar? I won't do that, right? If I have to understand BMW, I'll read the manual for BMW. Simple. Have you ever thought what is the user manual to you, to the human form that you've taken, this magnificent machine that you are, the being that you are? That's exactly what our rishis and yogis were after. They were very smart and they aspired to download the user manual of being human. Because who would know better about our system than the creator himself? And they did find a way. In the highest states of meditation, they could download this knowledge, which we now call the Vedas. With is to know, and that knowledge, they downloaded it without these Bluetooth wireless technologies, but it was a wireless download for sure. So rishis followed this. See, when they reached this, we know that okay, they reached, but how? They followed a process to reach there, right? And they could trace the seeds. of our existence, to the nature and consciousness that underlies all the manifest nature. So when they aspired to collaborate, at the beginning, they didn't have knowledge, but they started moving in that direction. Whenever we aspire to collaborate, um, we start with lesser knowledge, but if you want to know more, what do? You need to do an internship in that company. If you want to know more about the company, you do an internship in that company. Okay. So Ishvara Pranidhana is that internship till you are taken in as an official employee. As simple as that. Maybe I made it quite simple. So let's understand it a little deeper of how this concept of surrender works for us. Okay. So there was this person whom I met some time back, and without even the straight thing he asked me was, "What company do you work for?" The first thing I was like, "Okay, I don't work for a company," but then okay, I thought let's play, and I said I serve the company name is Gangadhara and Sons. He didn't like that name much, and I said, "What do you do?" So he said, I work for Nike. And there was so much of pride in his voice, as if he is running this company. Where did that pride or that empowerment come from? Okay, from the backing that that company offers. Please understand, we are going to correlate this concept with our study of Ishvara Pranidhana. So when he's getting this, his identity is empowered from being backed by this company that he's working for, this big, huge brand. Does that mean that he himself is nothing? Well, no, he's worked a lot to be at the position that he is. But does that mean that he knows everything that is to be known about that company? Well, of course not. But do we still consider that person as a representative of that brand? Yes, right? And does he have powers to undertake projects and take decisions on the behalf of the company? Maybe to a limited extent, maybe? Yes. Does he get paid and get incentives? Yes. And if he goofs up, if he makes a mess out of the project that he's undertaken and there is something, a bad image is created, is it his or the brand image? It's the brand image that is going to get affected. This person is just a small part of a big organism, a big organization. So what does the brand do to protect itself from this bad image? It has to thoroughly scan and test and interview and see the qualifications before taking in their employees, before they select their employees, because they represent them. The same thing happens in the spiritual realm. To get this entry point, we need to cultivate something called patrata, eligibility. But if we have immense faith, gradually, step by step, we develop this patrata. So we can be empowered, but for that, faith is the foundation stone. Okay. Now this guy is in this big company, Nike, and he starts doing his own things. Okay, now if that project of his or the idea of his, if it is in alignment with the company's idea, it will be accepted. Otherwise, he will be in constant conflict with the company as well as with himself. Because if he's not in alignment and there is a lot of friction from the higher authorities, his life is also going to be in conflict, right? The same is with dharma. If you are aligned to the larger dharma, the flow is easy. And if you are there in conflict, you might see that, okay, the world is like this is bad, he is bad, she is bad, the situation is bad. At the same time, what you feel inside will also be in conflict. Just check what you feel. It will be very, very true to each and every one of us. Okay. When you surrender, meaning when you align more and more. So now, right now, let us see it in the context of the company, that when you align more and more to the ideology of the company will start opening up its data, its infrastructure, its secrets, its powers to you. You keep moving higher and higher in your positions and more in your power. Now, this is not easy, believe me. To reach to that position, that person had to do a lot of sacrifice, a lot of hard work that had gone into it. Why would that person do it if he or she didn't have the faith in the core values of the company in the first place, right? So now, if you correlate this, as you surrender and align more and more to the universe, it will start opening up its data, its secrets, its powers onto you. So if you see, we started off with surrender, and when we come to the final step, we come back to this concept of surrender. Isn't that like fascinating? As fascinating as it might look, you see, this whole example, there is a big fallacy, and I deliberately chose it this way. All the while, even when the person was faithful to himself, to his company, the main motivation of this person was his personal good. We definitely are not undermining his contribution here, like his hard work and everything. Okay, with all due respect. But now think of a different scenario where this employee is not working for Nike, but he's working for the Indian Army. Okay? Gradually, he is increasing his rankings and knowledge and power and reaching at the higher, the top management level. So now what is his ultimate goal? Is it himself? Is it his family? His family will be taken care of by default, but the main goal is the safety of the whole nation. Now his idea of his family is much larger. And now suddenly, the respect that you have for that person changes. It increases manifold. Why? You ask that to yourself. If you've seen Charvi's talk of that Panchamahayagyas, that's where she had mentioned that deep within us, innately, each one of us, we know what is right, what is wrong. Okay, so when a person who was doing a lot of good and hard work was working for his own self versus a person who was working for the whole nation, you naturally come to respect that person more. Now imagine somebody who's working not for himself, not for the family, not even for the nation, but for bringing the harmony to the whole universe. How cool is that? We might think that it's like out of our league kind of a job, but believe me, we all are empowered and we are here on this planet just for this. To learn to align to the parent organization, it is not just our duty, but it is a privilege. And Ishvara Pranidhana, therefore, is the only way. There is no other way. As long as we stay in our little bubble of ego consciousness, this will never be achieved. But when you break that bubble, it is you who will receive, you who will expand. So surrender. Surrender like Gajendra, the elephant trapped in the crocodile jaws for like 1,000 years, and how he was freed by Sri Mahavishnu. Surrender like Vibhishana, who was trapped in Adharma and switched sides with Sharanagati to Sri Rama. Surrender like Markandeya. For the sake of his parents, he surrendered to Paramashiva. So you see, Shraddha is the first of the four essential qualifications for the attainment of this higher spiritual ideal of Samadhi, while Ishvara Pranidhan is the last niyama that leads towards Samadhi. Connecting the dots between Shraddha as presented in the first chapter of Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and Shraddha as presented in the world's oldest knowledge compilation, the Rig Veda. I would like to end this session by chanting the Shraddha Sutta. Shraddha Suktam is a collection of mantras where Shraddha has been considered as paramount in the world to accomplish something. The Suktam describes how the evil forces are uprooted with Shraddha and how the universe is running by Shraddha. His faith sustains us like a benevolent mother, supports the yogi till the very end. It is the source of indomitable energy or will, and as Swami Vivekananda says, indeed, Shraddha in oneself, Shraddha in God who has created us, and Shraddha in the divinity of man. This is what gives meaning to life. It is the power of Shraddha that makes everything possible, and the power behind all the powers, power that empowers life and is the single cause of all the success and growth and strength. Let us invoke the power of Shraddha in our life as the Shraddha Suktam from Rig Veda does. Broadly, it would mean that we invite the goddess Shraddha in the morning, we invite her at the noon and at the sunset. O goddess Shraddha, bless us that we have Shraddha in this life, at this time, and in this place. I'll just chant the Shraddha Suktam and then end the session. श्रद्धयज्ञः समित्यते श्रद्धया विन्दते हविः श्रद्धां भगस्य मूर्धनि वचसा वेदयामसि प्रियग्श्रद्धे ददतः प्रियग्श्रद्धेत्तिदासतः प्रियं भोजेषु यज्वसु इदं मे उदितं कृधि यथा देव असुरेषु श्रद्धामुग्रेषु चक्रिरे एवं भोजेषु यज्वसु अस्माकमुदितं कृधि श्रद्धान्देवा यजमानाः वायुर्गोपा उपासते श्रद्धागं हृदयया पूत्या श्रद्धया हूयते हविः श्रद्धां प्रातर्हवामहे श्रद्धां मध्यन्दिनं परि श्रद्धागं सूर्यस्य निमृचि श्रद्धे श्रद्धापयेहमा श्रद्धा देवानधिवस्ते श्रद्धा विश्वमिदं जगत् श्रद्धां कामस्य मातरम् हविषा वर्धयामसि ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु हरिः ॐ श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ तत्सत् Thank you so much.
Well, thank you first of all. It was very nice, and I hope that the Shraddha Suktam did not end at all. It was very peaceful. But thank you for sharing such beautiful concepts, Molly. Your Shraddha and the concept of Shraddha itself, how passionately you kind of spoke about it, but more so your examples, the quotes that you brought up, I think it also comes from the experience that you've had, and that's why the passion and the but it's absolutely infectious. You encourage us to believe in it and give it. You actually want to try it to see what happens, and incorporate these concepts. So yes, I mean some of the points that you mentioned about as simple as the neurons that fire together, wire together. Lovely. I mean, our human brains could definitely start behaving the behaviors that we keep repeating. Simple things, but I think people don't register, and we become what our actions and behaviors become, which is so scientifically true. I think some of those things we should definitely keep in mind. There are questions that we have. If you're okay, we can take them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by the way, that neurons thing is not mine. It is there. I just
It,
quoted it.
yes, I mean, absolutely. But those are the relevant aspects. Sometimes we don't, I mean, such profound things, but we, don't realize till they're actually explained in simpler terms.
Okay, let's go to the questions.
Okay, so there are a couple of them. The first one, talking about Shraddha, how do we know when it is Shraddha and when is it Andhashraddha? Can you help us with 5 pointers around this?
Okay. Uh, what you're essentially asking is the difference between faith and superstition. So, okay, faith versus superstitions, Shraddha and Andhashraddha. Okay, so when you have Shraddha, when you have that deep conviction, this conviction will make you feel powerful. Okay, and that power will actually guide you into your further actions. Versus if it is a superstition, you will start feeling helpless that, okay, I have to do this. And you find yourself bound rather than being free. Then the next would be Shraddha and Andhashraddha. Shraddha would be empowering, and Andhashraddha would be fear based. That when I have deep conviction and I keep on doing this, and then something, the truth reveals up to me, it feels empowering. But when I am into a superstition and I feel helpless and compulsive to do something, because if I don't do that, something bad will happen. It's a fear based concept. So understand, whenever you have this dilemma, see how you feel. Your heart will always give you the correct answer, whether you're feeling empowered or whether you're feeling fear based. Fourth, responsible versus dependent. When you have the faith is correct, you are responsible for your actions. So you're not here that, okay, because the guru is saying or because the shastra is saying, you're not yes, they are saying, they are your reference guide, but the action is yours and you take full responsibility of that. So responsible versus when it is Andhashraddha, there will be a dependency. Then you will get lost like that motorboat. And now what do I do next? Guruji, please tell me what do I do. Oh, so see, it's not wrong to take guidance, but that sense of dependence versus that real knowing is different and you will feel it. Core and peripheral. So when you are rooted in Shraddha, you will feel you are centered. There is a kind of peace about it, a well being about it. When it is superstition, when it is Andhashraddha, it will be peripheral. You will be talking about all the things, how to explain them, what words I use, but you will not feel centered. You will talk about everything else but the core thing because you're not sure about it. Okay, so there's a huge difference. And like we saw the definition of Shraddha itself, Shraddha is not just believing, you also then check the validity and the truth by your self experience. So that I think we'll make it very clear whether it is Shraddha or Andhashraddha.
Very well said. Actually, it's very rationally explained, and this does keep coming a lot of times. When especially our generation and the younger generation, where rationale plays a very very important role. Um, a lot of times, having faith is given a religious turn, or just say superstition. That's how it is looked at. So I think all of these points made a lot of sense, in terms of the way you explained it. So thank you. I guess this definitely helps the person who asked the question. The second one. So if ultimately we have to have faith and surrender, then why do we need scriptures at all? What is the relevance and what is the relevance of them if I have complete faith in myself and ready to work towards my own spiritual growth by following my heart? Why do we really need scriptures in the first place?
So I understand that you're asking this with a very innocent heart. So I would like to answer you, but had you asked this to some old school teachers, you would have got the grunt of them. But coming to the importance of scriptures and why we need them at all, well, these days, if you want to go from one street to another street, the next street you want Google Maps, and you're talking about navigating the life without scriptures. So it's anyway. So see, understand, Shraddha, the scriptures and their guidelines are important because sometimes, like you said, you have faith in yourself and you're ready to work for your own self, your own growth. You could be misguided, and sometimes it's nothing wrong to take some pointers. Even on the highways, when we go, we have those milestones that guide us. So let me give you an example. So there's this mafia don, okay, and this huge organization that he's running. Yeah, and what do you think? The employees, as in all those people who are working for him, do you think they don't have faith in what they are doing, or they don't even have any paperwork? All this is just by the word of mouth. It's like ultimate faith and conviction that they're working with. What happens? The Shraddha is there, but it is misguiding. Okay. Then what could happen? So suppose I'm not aware. I am driving my car. There is a traffic signal. I don't want to follow the rules. It could be disastrous. Okay. And third, say I am, forget me, there are people who are climbing Mount Everest. Okay. Those who have created records. You know that even when they did that, they had this Gurkha, they had these people who would guide them, those who are from that region. So you see, your own hard work is not the only guide, man. You need a guide, otherwise, in this vast landscape, you could get lost. So it's never only about your hard work, it's also about some directions and some guidelines that we all need. And if you want to know about what happens in the what is the condition of those who neglect the scriptures, please go and study the 17th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Shri Krishna Bhagavan explains it in a huge detail, but not getting into that. Let me explain it to you with a story by Ramakrishna Paramhansa. It's a beautiful story, simple story that. So there is this lake, and a lot of people have told me that there are fish in that lake. Okay, so this person goes and with this line and this fishing rod, and he sits there, and there is a bait tied to that hook, and he couldn't catch any fish. Okay, what happens is that day he comes back, he still have Shraddha in what others have said. A lot of people have said that okay, there are fish, so he keeps trying. So he keeps trying the next day, in the next day, in the next day, till the day that he actually catches a fish. And that's when It becomes a verified truth of his own experience. But till then, till he could have his own experience, he was motivated by the knowledge that was existing previously. So, uh, so the scriptures are like guidelines, and when you put them in action and live by them, it will turn into a living, verified truth. See, scriptures are not just like a book or a printed something that you read chapter by chapter. It looks like a dead object, but when you start following, they become living entities. Your living, verified truth. Something very, very important. And what do they do eventually? See, there's this divine truth hidden in all of us. So, our gurus tell us about it, or the scriptures tell us about it. We have not seen it as yet. But we believe in their words. We struggle to make that belief true by our realization. But in that process, they were like the base support systems. So the importance of scriptures, if you say, is immense.
Absolutely agree. Very well put, especially the whole point where you said, as simple as Google Maps, right? I do think that these scriptures, they're still relevant even after so many millennia. They're so relevant in today's world. And to take your point further, I really hope that we would have these taught to younger children, much younger, much earlier in their lives, and imagine how much guidance they would get. The whole concept of yama niyama, and following them, they're not easy in literal sense in today's world, but they are so profound. They, if you think of it, they should be the base and the foundation of our lives. So
They're not
I guess,
easy, but they're not difficult as well. You just need Shraddha. And like you said, earlier you instill them, the better it is. So for the girls who come to me for their pregnancy or for conception, that is when we actually want them to get into these. So the children who come up, they already are guided by these. And the scriptures are, like you said, relevant before than they were, and now these are timeless. These are timeless because they don't talk about the context or time or present situation. They are the manuals of us as human beings, and that stays as long as we stay. So, yeah.
and we learned some bit of this in the Vedanta course also on the Saturdays.
Yeah.
I probably would take this opportunity and share with everybody. There is one element that Molly had touched upon earlier, that Saturdays there is a Vedanta course that happens, is conducted under the Amru Foundation. It is a year-long course every Saturdays. It is conducted by Ms. Charvi Shah, and I would definitely encourage, I think, on behalf of Team Ramru and all the other participants that we have, do join, and it's pay what you wish kind of a module. The intent is not to have a fixed charge, but definitely something that I personally attended, and I look forward for all the coming sessions. It just started on the 3rd of July, this month, as part of Bilwa also. So really looking forward to it, and I would encourage all of you. You can go to our website and check out more details about it. But there are 2 or 3 more questions, Molly, if you're okay with the time.
That,
Okay. Third one, all these concepts sound so big. What if I strive to be a good person and live a meritful life, doing my job, taking care of my family, not hurting or harming others? I think life is simple. Do these concepts unnecessarily complicate our lives?
see, we cannot be insulated from the world because we are of this world. We are it. It's just about where our focus is. If it is only on your personal gratification or your smaller circles, or whether it is about a larger gratification. Anyways, you are a part of it. There is no running away from it. Even if you want, you cannot. So we search and we get established at our center. And the moment this happens, automatically this shift will happen from being this self-centered to be able to see that there is no larger or outside or inside. We are whole. And when you understand that, all these selfish activities therefore will automatically feel futile. There is no effort needed to realize this. Once this realization dawns, the perspective changes by itself. So I'll give you a short insight into this. In this text, Tattva Vaisharadi, Vijnana Bhikshu is the author. He specifically indicates that the nature of Ishvara Pranidhana, it's presented in two ways, right? So as presented in the Kriya Yoga part of the second chapter of Yoga Sutras, it is more oriented towards requiring some action from our side or devotion, demonstrating devotion and surrender and a spirit of offering. However, when you see the same concept that comes in the first chapter, it is born out of jnana, and it takes form of a very meditative process involving the mindful recitation of pranava. We saw this earlier when we were talking. So, pranidhana there gives rise to a sampragnata samadhi, and there is no residual karma, hence the seed or the impressions, except of course that which comes from the prarabdha, which is anyways it will be eliminated through the experience of samadhi. And the nature of pranidhana that is mentioned in the second chapter, it serves to weaken the kleshas. All these things that you are saying are a part of the kleshas, the ragas and asmita. And they prepare, what they're doing is they prepare a ground of clarity for the mind. So you see, the Kriya Yoga alone is not sufficient to render these kleshas ineffective. So when you find these things difficult, it's just step by step you go, and when you reach here, just by weakening the kleshas, things will come back. You will go back into your earlier pattern. So the impact can be reduced, but not eliminated. For this, that temporarily what Viveka is created out of this, we have to strengthen that, and that is strengthened by following up Kriya Yoga with both Abhyasa and Vairagya, the study as well as detachment, and then to maintain this clarity. Unless this clarity comes, you will always be in this delusion that okay, it is me and my family. You are the universe. There is no running away from it. So there is no point of trying to escape.
Thank you. The next question, Molly, that we have is the whole process of yoga is to understand ourselves, become a better version of ourselves, observe the self, purify the self. To be able to see clearly, then why, after doing all of these, it says that surrender yourself or lose your identity? Isn't it paradoxical?
It sounds so at the first glance. Let's study this topic deeper and see what it actually means. So, if you see this universe, so now the science is also established. We all know that universe is ever expanding, ever changing, ever evolving every moment. And now where are you? Stuck in that egocentric identification of yours. I'm this, I am that, I am not this, I like this, I don't like this. How are you so fixated when the whole cosmos is changing? Huh? So first it is important to remove this attachment from this fixated form, this 5 yamas and the niyamas. So the 5 yamas actually help you to realize this, and the niyamas will help you to put it in practice, especially the swadhyaya and the tapas precisely help you to do that. So this swadhyaya and tapas, the self-observation and purification, they are like a sculptor's chisel. out of a stone block that you are, you gradually chisel out all the attachments to create a beautiful version of yourself, like a sculpture. When you see that grandeur, you will be in awe with your own beauty, and gratitude will automatically flow out. But even here, if ahankara and asmita arise again with this new form, again you are stuck. Okay. And this has happened. This has happened to a lot of people who are on this path, that they get distracted from the main goal of the practice. But yes, so to be in alignment with this ever-changing cosmos, you have to be nothing so that you could be anything. Get it? That's why this Kriya Yoga of Swadhyaya, Tapasa, and Ishwar Pranidhan, it's not enough. As we talked earlier, it has to be followed by Abhyasa and Vairagya, detachment. So when you lose yourself completely into becoming nothing, that's where the magic happens. You see that amidst that which is in this which is this ever-changing universe, there is something which is eternal, something which is all-pervading in each and every particle of this universe. And if you know that, then then you know everything. So the biggest secret is revealed to you in the form of pure ananda. No more conflicts. But to reach here, there are steps. So I will just frame your question into the steps, that there are steps to reach there. The first step is to accept your current identification, study it, and then have Shraddha and set out on an exploration. Then the journey through the cosmic principles of the yamas and niyamas and the guidelines to chisel yourself and then surrender that itself. By losing that small peck of dust that you are, you gain the entire universe in return. This process of yoga is moving from the basic governance of human personality to experience of ananda. It's a journey from anushasana to swarupe avasthanam, resting in your own self, the true self. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense, and appreciate as beautiful and inspiring that it sounds, that it just makes so much sense. When the whole universe changes, why are we stuck? We are literally a speck of dust, or probably smaller than that, in the whole scheme of cosmos. It's just this realization that needs to stick with us. I think we need to keep reminding ourselves. We realize this when we talk about it, but then when we go back to our daily routine, we go back to our egocentricness, and it comes in many ways. It manifests in many ways. I guess that's where the whole practice of yoga plays such a crucial role, and the yogic practices to bring us down to this realization, keep reminding ourselves and keep practicing to
That's the role of
whatever.
abhyasa. That's the role of abhyasa. Repeating it, not letting yourself forget, even for a moment.
I think that's profound, and we all should practice. It needs effort, and that should be put in. It's for our own benefit. It's like, saying I have to work hard for myself.
It's like an effortless effort, because initially you might feel that resistance or that effort that you're putting in, but once you start aligning, it just starts happening, because that's what you are. That's what you are innately, inherently. So then it just flows. Then it becomes literally like effortlessly. It is done.
Thank you, Madhu. One last question. I have attended your workshop, and this is actually, I have attended your workshop literally on psychoneuroimmunology a few years back. I think this was 3 years back, when you talked about how our bodies are like mirrors at the micro level to these macrocosmic concepts that you have just talked in today's talk. Um, clearly you are deeply interested in the neuroscience and the workings of human brain. So can you explain what does the concept of Ishwar Pranidhana do to our human brains? I mean, does the human brain work differently once these concepts are practiced?
Okay. Yes, in the workshop we did talk about how our body is. So let's start with the body. Let's come to the brain later. In fact, our bodies demonstrate this concept of Ishwar Pranidhan at the best. Okay, so now let's understand this. You say, for example, your pancreas. The pancreatic cells do their own work. They don't compare themselves or compete to the cells of your heart, and they don't want to become the cells of the heart. They're doing their job. The heart cells are different. They are doing their own job. Who are they working for? Does the pancreas think that, oh, I am a good person and I'll work for myself, and is that okay? No, right? If the heart starts thinking like that and the pancreas starts thinking like that, the whole organism will fall. While they are doing the best of what they can do, they are working for the larger organism. And while they work for the larger organism, their own good is exactly in that. Not, in fact, if they work just for themselves and not for the rest of the body, they will also be endangered. So, if you understand this, then you understand the concept of Ishvara Pranidhana, that we are a part of a larger organism and we just play our part at the best of our abilities, and that's enough for the organism to function efficiently. Okay? So the body. Now coming to the brain part of it. Okay. You to first understand when we talk about Ishwar Pranidhana and versus the ego consciousness. It's about interdependence versus independence. In the, like we talked about it earlier, when we talk about Ishwar Pranidhana, we talk about collaborations, we talk about interdependence. And when it is ego consciousness, I want freedom, I want my own independence, this is my right. All of this comes in. If you see how the neurons connect to each other, if you see how the brain functions, it's so much more about interdependence versus this concept of, and that's an incomplete concept of independence that the current generation believes. If you see a brain scan, when you're operating out of Ishvara Pranidhana, you will see the prefrontal cortex getting lighted up. And when you're operating out of this ego consciousness, the limbic cortex, the mammalian brain, will start responding. And that's a huge difference. The prefrontal cortex is the human part of your brain that starts working the moment you shift into the Ishvara Pranidhana mode. And then the way you must have heard about these concepts of intelligent quotient, the IQ and the EQ. It's all about how the neurons connect to each other. So whether they are connecting in a linear fashion or an associative fashion, when you move into Ishvara Pranidhana, there is a spontaneous firing. The wisdom quotient is lighted up. And that's where all the dots instantly connect. Some people, Archimedes, the eureka, aha moment that we talk about. What is that? That is when the neurons fire together. There's a spontaneous firing, and everything, all that you have in your mind is brain is connected. This is the most creative state of being, and that's where we want to be our best. Okay, so when you are in this mode of Ishvara Pranidhana, forget about what you are doing to the universe. You are doing the best that you could for the best state of brain that you could bring about. So maybe these are the short glimpses into what Ishvara Pranidhana could do to the brain. Maybe some things will come to my mind later, but for now, this is what comes up.
In fact, it was so perfect, explaining that this is how exactly our body functions. It's interdependence and not independence. I think if you would have probably mention this whole scientifically the way you just did with the examples. When our body functions like that, the whole universe functions like that, and we try to function individually, I think all of us would have just bought this concept right in the beginning.
That's because this whole generation is all about logic and all about science. There's nothing wrong about it, but sometimes we need to know that we need to go beyond these concepts and beyond these boxes that we've created for ourselves. So, deliberately, I did bring when we were talking about Shraddha, we needed to have Shraddha in what we were doing in the practice of yoga sadhana and not taking the support of, yeah, of course, it is a science, but we didn't want the neuroscience to come in when we were talking about Shraddha is bigger, much, much bigger.
Beautiful, Molly. Thank you very much. Loved the session, and thank you for the privilege for me to be part of it. Thank you again, and thank you for everyone. Thank you everyone for joining the session. If you want to listen to our previous sessions from Bilwa 2020 or this year, you can always go to our YouTube channel, Realm of Tamru. Tomorrow we all meet. Molly will be in conversation with Dr. David Frawley, Pandit Vamadeva Shastri ji. He is a renowned scholar, one of the recipients of Padma Bhushan Award by the Government of India, author of about 40 books. He's a Vedacharya, and he's the founder and director of American Institute of Vedic Studies. He talks about the subject. His topic of the talk is Vedic origins of yoga and its branches and its different branches. It's going to be a lovely session, 6:30, 7:30 Indian Standard Time. Please join in the same place at Realm of Damru to be a YouTube live sessions, and be prepared for with your questions for his session tomorrow. So we look forward to having you tomorrow, and Molly listening to you with Panditji. So looking forward for tomorrow's session. Have a lovely day, and thank you, everybody.